Welcome back to the conversation. If you are a consumer of even, say, a modest variety of news sources, you probably know by now that during Thanksgiving week, Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago dined with Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist who is a Holocaust denier, and his friend Kanye West, the rapper who has trafficked in hate. A number of Republicans have described this as an effing PR nightmare, not just for MAGA world, but also for the Republican Party. But if you rely solely on Fox News, this is probably news to you. In fact, according to Media Matters, Fox News, since this happened, has spent a total amount of time covering the story of 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Joining us is Craig Harrington. He's the research director for Media Matters. And Craig, I know you guys watch Fox News, so the rest of us don't have to, but was this perhaps even surprising for all of you who track them?
It wasn't necessarily surprising, and first of all, thank you for having me, David. It wasn't necessarily surprising for those of us who watch Fox News full time. You know, we somewhat expected that they would find every opportunity to bury this story and attempt to move on. But you can't deny how stark the lack of coverage was. And 7 minutes is actually being generous. We round up for the sake of simplicity, but if you go back and watch, it's only about 6 minutes and 40 seconds, which, as you know, is one long cable news segment. And actually, when we did some comparisons between Fox and their competitors, legitimate news organizations like CNN and MSNBC, we found very easily on Monday morning individual segments on CNN's morning show and on MSNBC's morning show that were roughly equal to, or actually, in the case of CNN's, double the length of coverage that Fox gave this story. On Fox, this was just a couple of headline news segments, a couple of mentions so that they could claim that they didn't ignore it entirely. But when you look at the breadth of a 24-hour news organization like Fox, they could have dug into this as much as they wanted to. Anyone who has seen Fox go wall to wall with coverage on their pseudo scandals or their manufactured crises knows what Fox can do when they want to highlight something. This was a very, very deliberate effort. And an obvious effort.
The most that it got highlighted were people who were not even on air, talent of Fox News, but were invited on, whether it's Fox News Sunday or some other show, and happened to mention it. What's so surprising to me about all this is that Fox News, the Murdoch empire, have come out, it seems like, sort of against Donald Trump, saying it's time for the party to move on. So what does Fox News gain from a strategic perspective of trying to bury this story and trying to keep Donald Trump's hands clean when it comes to anti-Semitism and white nationalism and far-right stuff?
Well, in this case, excuse me, in this case, Fox is implicated just as badly as Donald Trump is. It's almost impossible for Fox News, which hosts Tucker Carlson in its most prominent primetime news segment, Tucker Carlson's hour-long primetime program. It's almost impossible for Fox News to be taken seriously when they say anything regarding anti-Semitism when they promote what is essentially the white power hour hosted by Tucker Carlson. All of the tropes that Nick Fuentes and Ye have promoted on social media, the sorts of commentary that have gotten them banned or deplatformed, is largely just passed off as commentary from Tucker Carlson on a pretty routine basis, with the sharpest corners sanded down. Nick Fuentes is willing to use racial slurs that would never make it onto air on Fox, and he's willing to say overtly what would only ever be dog whistles or just asking questions from Fox News's primetime lineup. But they're just as implicated in this as Trump is, and that's also the same reason that you see the GOP, saying vaguely that they oppose anti-Semitism and putting out condemnations of Ye or of Fuentes individually, but never mentioning Trump. If they ever brought up the fact that it was problematic that Trump had this relationship with anti-Semites, it would immediately reflect on their problematic relationship with the same people and with Trump himself.
Full disclosure, I was a correspondent for I left, and that was more than 20 years ago. But back then, and when I was in Washington, and I'm so curious, Craig, to hear your sort of perspective on this. When I was in DC, Fox tried to sort of make a distinction between its news programming led by Brit Hume or say Bret Baier and its opinion programming, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly. And it seems like they're still trying to do the same, saying, oh no, well, Bret Baier is a newsman, he doesn't traffic in this. And yet, there was that book that came out that found that Bret Baier had actually pushed his political decision desk in 2020 to take back their call of Arizona for Joe Biden. So in terms of sort of the zeitgeist of Washington, is Fox still somehow able to get away with making this argument about a distinction between Bret Baier and Tucker Carlson, or is that just sort of laughed at now?
There's some occasion where serious journalists and commentators who treat themselves with some degree of respect will actually sort of play along with the news moniker in Fox News's name. But one of the things that we have seen over the past decade is a fairly successful effort from Media Matters and from other organizations and from legitimate news outlets who don't want to see themselves included into the cohort with Fox News, recognizing that it is not a legitimate news operation. You may occasionally hear people comment that there are journalists who work at Fox and there are people who do legitimate or objective analysis, but it really just has to do with longevity. The longer you stay at Fox, the more partisan your commentary naturally becomes, and that is even true of people who headline the supposed straight news programs, say Bret Baier or John Roberts or Brit Hume, who you mentioned. Brit Hume is now widely considered to be one of their most partisan senior political analysts, and he started off as someone who was regularly trotted out as being objective and analytical, and now he's purely partisan in his commentary and very predictable in his perspective on news and notes. Brit Hume, like you said, had pressured the decision desk at Fox News to rescind their Arizona call in 2020. He also has allowed his commentary to be imbued with right-wing talking points in many instances.
I think you meant Bret Baier. I think you said Brit Hume, but in any case, yeah. But all the, look, one of the things that it's sort of struck me in the wake of Donald Trump and trafficking and anti-Semitism and white nationalism is I think the FBI director testified recently in Washington and said that the number of sort of hateful acts, violence, and threats against Jewish institutions is up something like 60%, or comprises something like 60% of all the threats, even though the Jewish community comprises I think only 2.6%. So it feels like there is a relationship, there is almost a causal relationship between Fox News sort of washes its hands of it or doesn't condemn this stuff. And it almost feels like with a wink and a nod, it says to the crazy people, to the racists in our midst, oh yeah, it's okay for them to engage in violence. And in a way, it makes me think that in some ways Fox News is responsible.
It does seem as if you can point to a media permission structure, particularly when you think about the way that Fox News is used as a validator for so many far-right talking points where they uphold or amplify individual far-right motivations or individuals or provocateurs or instigators. They may not officially condone all of that individual behavior, or they may not condone everything that an individual or organization adheres to and promotes. But by amplifying these things, they create a permission structure and they inject these conversations into the bloodstream. The anti-Semitism that we see routinely from Fox News and the anti-Semitism that we see routinely from the individuals that Fox News chooses to amplify and promote, it's getting out there and it's becoming more mainstream, particularly within the Republican base. And so it shouldn't be seen as a surprise that we might see hate crimes or uses of slurs on the rise. Whenever you create a permission structure, you're going to see provocateurs rush to fill that void. This is something we saw with Twitter as well. When Elon Musk completed his corporate takeover of that social media platform, we saw a very brief but enormous spike in the use of slurs and other forms of identifiable hate speech on that platform. Why? It wasn't as if a new rush of users had joined. It was users who were already on the platform now sort of testing the fences. And even if they did it only briefly, even if it was eventually rescinded, creating the opportunity gave the impetus and the motivation for individuals to act out.
I know that Media Matters through the years has tried to reach out to Fox News to get to some response, and usually there's no response. But in this particular case, where it's been pointed out by Media Matters, and I suppose maybe even other journalists have picked up and said, "Hey, Fox News, what's going on here? You've only given maybe 7 minutes to this story." Has there been any response, any reaction from Fox News to when this is brought up and people talk about it?
They haven't responded to this individual story or the aspects of it, as is pretty typical for that organization. They don't think of criticism of their reporting as valid, and generally they try to avoid really any recognition of it unless it comes with an attached legal threat. But what we have seen is some of the commentary that Fox News is providing in the days since our study of their coverage or lack of coverage of the Fuentes incident, their commentary on it has begun to shift a little bit. Initially, it was to bury it, hide it in a news alert, give it 21 seconds of airtime and move on. And now their commentary has shifted a bit, where they're having some of their on-air talent address the scandal directly and acknowledge that it is important, but then demand that we can pivot toward other things that they say as more important. Just yesterday, during their midday program, Outnumbered, Lisa Kennedy Montgomery, who's one of their professional propagandists, she was on there and she was saying, in response to the Fuentes story, obviously this is something that is all over the news, but it's really a mainstream media story. It's not relevant to the people. And what really matters, and what I wish the media would cover, is the situation at the southern border. And she was actually trying to pivot away from a conversation about a scandal involving white supremacists and Trump, and pivot toward talking points that are openly white supremacist, which actually emanate from Trump. And she was doing it without any degree of irony, because that's what they want to talk about now.
Yeah, it's shameful, and they have no shame, basically. The idea that they would say this stuff straight is remarkable. One quick question, finally. Fox News likes to say, "Oh, well, we're not OAN, we're not Newsmax." You guys are watching all of this. Are they moving towards those really far-right channels, or are they sort of staying in their lane?
I mean, Fox has more or less absorbed a much of the far-right ecosystem that previously was available for Newsmax and OAN. You'll remember, and this is something that you mentioned earlier, when Fox News did make the call for Arizona, a lot of their viewers moved en masse to OAN and Newsmax, and Fox responded in kind by unleashing their primetime lineup to go even further right and bring those people back into the fold. And they've largely been successful, and that was over 2 years ago.
Yeah, and there was Brett Baer right after the election saying, well, maybe we should take it back, and he's their Fox News guy. Remarkable stuff. Craig Harrington, Research Director of Media Matters. Craig, always great having you on the program. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much for your time.
And that'll do it for this edition of The Conversation. On behalf of Asher Cofield, Gina Kim, Craig Lowry, and Bart Kyle, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching.